What's going on today, Internet? Selfish here with Retrospect. Today we're going to take a look at the Ayaneo Pocket Micro, a boutique love letter to the Nintendo Micro. We're going to visit and see if this high-end Game Boy Advance is worth the high-end price tag. Let's take a look. Now that we got that unboxing out of the way, let's go through the I/O here real quick before we really dig into this device. We'll start on the top here like we always do. We do have triggers, both L and R, 1 and 2. We do have our volume, and then we do have a fingerprint sensor / power button that is interesting. We do some vents here for the fan that's internal on here. On the back here, we do also have some ventilation for the internal cooling system. On the right hand side over here, we do have a couple of buttons that do different things depending on what you're doing. This RC button typically will open up your menus if you're in an emulator, and this other button does random things like a back button and things like that. On the right hand side here, we do have a memory card slot, which is very difficult to A, open, and B, get your memory card out. I actually have to use the tweezers to get my card out. It won't come out any other way. So it's an interesting little thing we got going on there. On the bottom here, we do have a C-hole, and that's going to be for charging, and then we have some downward firing speakers. On the front here, we do have our D-pad, which is pretty soft, but it actually works fairly well for most things. Not the best fighting D-pad, but for everything else, it seems to work pretty well. We do have our face buttons. These do have a good amount of travel. Not too much, not too little. It's actually about perfect. It's a pretty quick push. We'll take a look at it here in the poker cam. So if you can see that there. But so we got our travel there. We do have our joysticks, which are phenomenal. These caps actually came with mine. If you saw that in the unboxing, it came with caps, but otherwise they look just like this. I like these joysticks. I think these are the same ones out of the Retroid 2S. The Pocket 2S, maybe, possibly. They're very close, and they have a decent amount of travel. They do have the really thin posts on them, so that helps with the travel a little bit. And then we do have this gorgeous display. So let's go over the specs of this here real quick, and then we will discuss some other things. And I'll be real quick with the specs here on this handheld. There's a lot of information out there about it. It is running Android OS 13. It is a MediaTek Helio G99 processor, running a Mali-G57 MC2 GPU. It's got a 3.5-inch IPS display at 960 by 640. And it's a 3.2 display. That is a perfect display for Game Boy Advance at 4x resolution. That's what you got going on right there. It has either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. My particular unit has 6. It also has either 128 or 256 of internal memory. If you get the 8 gigs of RAM, you get the 256 of internal memory. And that RAM is LPDDR4X. If you're interested in mega transfers, it's 4,266 mega transfers per second. I don't know why they list it that way on this one, seeing as it's just a retro handheld and not a pocket PC, but you know, whatever. It does have Wi-Fi 5 and also supports Bluetooth 5.2. So you can use all your peripherals with Bluetooth pretty much that are on today's market with this particular handheld. I did miss a couple buttons too when I was going over the other stuff, and I totally forgot about this. On the bottom here, you have your select, start, then you have your Ayaneo button, which does different things depending on what you're doing. And then you have a back button again. Again, they all do different things depending on what you're doing. If you are in an emulator that's not RetroArch, this button here on the side tends to open up your menus, so you can get into your menus. This ASpace button or Ayaneo space button is supposed to open up ASpace on here. Sometimes it exits your game, especially if you're playing GameCube for some reason. Seems to be the one system that it does it a lot on, and I'm not sure why that is. Now, I went with red because I figured black would be a fingerprint magnet, and the red is not so bad. I mean, you can sometimes see some stuff, but the only place you really see them is here on the screen. But on the handheld itself, you don't really see them. Before I go through a couple design things here, because of the size and the way the weight's distributed through this handheld, to me it feels heavy. It's really not that heavy, but it's just like a little brick. So it comes in at 240 grams. By comparison, now this has a much bigger screen, and you would expect it to be heavier anyways. But just kind of give you an idea, because a lot of people have this handheld. This is the TrimUI Smart Pro. This is coming in at 261 grams. So it's about 20 grams lighter. But because it is the way that it is, it feels really heavy at times. We'll compare it to another handheld that's made out of all metal. Now this is a very, very much smaller handheld, but this is only coming in at 108 grams. But if you add the Magic X to it as well, then you will be coming in still about 3 grams lighter than this bad boy. So think about having both these in your pocket. This is still 3 grams lighter. Try to pick a couple handhelds a lot of people have. And I know not a lot of people have this yet, though it looks like it might be starting to get worked on in the modding community, but we do also have this bad boy. This is only coming in at 30 grams heavier, with a 5-inch screen and still in an all aluminum body. So density wise, this is just very dense. Now moving on to a couple other things that are pretty cool about this. So you think this would be really uncomfortable because it is a brick, but it's very rounded. Everything is rounded off, so it's really not a square brick. All the edges are rounded. Now these edges on the sides aren't rounded as much, which can be a little irritating, like when you're trying to use the shoulder buttons, and also like where my fingers sometimes rest, it might get a little uncomfortable after a while. But this is a retro handheld that's not necessarily made to be used for 3-hour sessions or the entire 4-hour battery life. Typically when you look at something like this, it's made to be put in your pocket. Obviously they tried really hard to make this pocketable, again with without the stick caps on. I mean, it's pretty close. Now one thing I have found though is these sticks do come off pretty easily. In fact, in the case that they gave me, which somehow I ended up with 2 of those and 2 sets of screen covers. Also, I thought the screen cover was going to cover the entire piece of glass. I didn't realize it was just going to be the screen. But I have found that the actual sticks themselves pop off in there all the time. And I realized after a while that they looked different. Well, there's a little rubber condom on these that sits right underneath the stick itself. It's actually the dust cover. And that dust cover comes off on its own as well. And sometimes it's really hard to find because it's really tiny, and it's depending on the dexterity you have in your fingers, you might not be able to feel it. Lucky for me, it's always gotten stuck in that bag that came with this, but if I were to lose that in my pocket, I may not find it as I'm pulling things out of my pocket. It could end up on the ground. That's actually the second time the stick cover came off. I tried putting this in my pocket just to see how it worked, and I was around the house, and I pulled it out, and one of my sticks hit the ground. So that is just something to be aware of if you do end up getting this handheld, or if you have one, or if you're waiting for your order to come in. I haven't had it happen on any other handheld like it happens on this one. This all aluminum construction is fantastic. It's seamless pretty much, other than the back here where they have a piece of plastic. So this back part is actually made out of plastic, which is the only place you can see seams, and they're still tight, even though it's plastic on metal. They were able to actually keep those seams really tight, which is pretty impressive. Hooking 2 materials together like that, it worked really well. I mean, I understand it's screwed in, but just to get them to set well together is pretty good. And the rest of it just seems like a one-piece cutout design. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it sure looks like it, and that's how it feels. It's a very, very comfortable handheld to hold. This all-glass front end is pretty neat. I don't know that's necessary, but it is pretty neat to have this full glass piece across the front end. I don't know that you can really call it edgeless. It definitely has the appearance of being edgeless for sure, until you put a screen cover on, and then it kind of actually makes the different colors pop out. So I'm gonna go through some gameplay footage here real quick. I'm just gonna pop in a couple games. I'm actually re-recording this whole thing just to take some games out, and then I had a few opinions that, though my end result is the same, I've changed my opinion on a couple of things on here since I've been using it more, mostly for the positive. So we'll talk about that here after we play a couple of games. Alright, so as you can see, it can play a lot of stuff. It can struggle its way through PS2 if you really wanted to. There are a few PS2 games that will play decently. Obviously, we didn't see a lot of that here, even if we're running on high performance mode. If you play Nintendo Switch on here, there are a couple of really low 2D games that you can play on here. The trick with Nintendo Switch games, when it comes to emulation, especially on a really underpowered handheld like this, the less megabytes the game is, the more likely it is to play on here. So that's just, I guess, my personal trick to that. But if you're playing a game that's like 500 megabytes, it's likely to play on here. But if you're going to play something that's 2 gigabytes or more, some of those games are 30 to 60 gigabytes. If you're targeted into like the FIFA stuff, those games are never going to play on here. It just doesn't have the processing power for that. And remember that if you're going to use an emulator, the minimum requirement for most of the new emulators is 8 gigabytes. So if you are going to do that, you want to at least get the 8 gigabyte model. The Indiegogo is still going for this. Once that's done, this handheld goes up to $250. So let's talk about price to performance real quick and what I feel about that, because this way underperforms. I've had this problem with G99 CPUs for over a year now. I've got 3, I think maybe 4 tablets now that I've gotten to do reviews on that I just haven't really reviewed because the G99 just can't do it. It just can't play much more than anything else. So I started doing some research in this because I was really frustrated because it's been frustrating. Everybody talks about this G99 as being this excellent, like super powerful chip, like this is overpowered. It's not though. This is more or less powered the same as every Anbernic device out there. And I'm going to show you that right now. The G99 performs almost exactly the same as the H700. Now, when you're testing, there is some differences. So the G99, in full fairness, is running Android, which is a resource hog. So when you're running testing, you are going to see it hogging resources versus the H700 in any of the testing I'll be able to find on that, which is obviously running Linux. So you do have an advantage there as far as the Linux side. But either way, when it comes to playing the handheld, they're going to come out the same. And your CPU performance on the G99 is only 1 point difference than an H700. Now, if you want to compare it to another chip that's running on an Android, we'll look at the T820 that's in the Anbernic Cube as well as the RG556. That far outperforms this handheld. So now we're looking at a $250 handheld that pretty much performs like a $50 Anbernic handheld and trying to sell for more than $150 to $170 Anbernic handheld. Don't get me wrong, Anbernic's not the end all. I'm struggling to see where people think that this performs so well. It performs as expected. Again, you can play some minimum PS2. PSP here, you can run like 2x on God of War, but if you actually look at PPSSPP, there's a lot of hacks built into God of War. You can pretty much make that thing run on a calculator at this point. I know it's a benchmark game that we all use, but at the end of the day, unless you turn those hacks off, it's going to run fine. And it ran at full speed for the most part for me when I ran it. There were a couple hiccups, but for the most part, at 2x resolution, it'll run at full speed. Where this really excels is in Game Boy Advance. And we've seen a lot of Game Boy Advance-centric devices this year. And I think it's because they have such a massive catalog. And it was really kind of, prior to this year, maybe a year and a half, it was kind of an underappreciated system in the retro space. And a lot of the games that are in it are seen on other systems as well. So, for example, a lot of the handhelds that we review won't play Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island at full speed, but they also made an advanced version of that. On top of the fact that the picture clarity and stuff is pretty good, but that is a 3:2 screen as well. So if you're doing a love letter to the Game Boy Micro, you really are kind of doing a Game Boy Advance love letter. Just like the Macro. The Macro will play DS and advanced games and stuff like that. You know, so you have that option. You still have both of the slots, so you can put in either one. You can play all your Game Boy games, and you can play your DS games right out of that one handheld. And that's because the Macro begins as a DS, or a DS Lite. But there's not a lot of performance here. So I have a hard time recommending this handheld to anybody on value. This is a boutique handheld. It is phenomenal. It feels good. It looks good. It performs well. It performs as expected. I guess I'm not disappointed because I didn't expect it to perform any better than it did or any worse than it did, because I've looked at so many G99s already that I knew that this wasn't going to be powerful when I got it. So to me, Game Boy Advance is my baby. That's what I've been really shooting for. If you're a friend of this channel and you've been around for a little bit, you know that Game Boy Advance is what I've been trying to emulate this entire time. I'm just so, like, I'm having a good year this year by getting a lot of handhelds that will emulate it. But this is kind of the handheld I think I've been waiting for, where it emulates it so well. I mean, the resolution alone, it's at 4x, right? I also really like the V10, and the V10 is at a 2x resolution. I can barely tell the difference. I mean, you really got to squint to tell the difference when this is running versus a V10. Because you got to remember, they're on a 3.5 inch screen. It's not like we're blowing this thing up to a big TV. So on a 3.5 inch screen, they look about the same. And so I could buy 7 or 8 V10s for the price of one of these. That value, I'm having a really hard time grasping the value. Now, for someone like me who is reviewing these all the time, this is a breath of fresh air. It's nice. It's not an H700, even though it performs like an H700. but it is a different SoC, so we do get to see some new things, and it is running on Android, so we get to see some new things. But then you have like this garbage. For one, this this fingerprint scanner never unlocks my handheld. It always just tells me that I've tried it too many times, do some weird stuff, so then I actually have to go in and put in a password. But if I'm shopping online, like I really do, but I was in the Play Store and I needed to renew something, and the fingerprint scanner worked fine for renewing. It just doesn't ever unlock the handheld for me. Very rarely does it unlock the handheld. Every once in a while I get lucky. Every squirrel gets a nut every once in a while. Most of the time, it's not unlocking it for me, so I actually have to go and put in a password, which seems ridiculous. My Odin works phenomenally. I think about touching my Odin and it opens. Similar to my bank account, apparently, on Google Play. But back to IOSpace. So we'll touch on a few things here really quick. It's okay. So I started off when I first did this, I put Beacon on here, and then I tried Emulation Station, and then I already swapped my library around, so then I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try IOSpace because it specifically needs your library to be in one of like 6 formats, and one of those happens to be Emulation Station. So since I'd already moved my library around, I thought I'd try it. You don't get pictures. So if you have a massive Game Boy Advance library like I do, the only way to get pictures is to find them individually. You literally have to individually go in and find every picture. Otherwise, you just have a lot of games. And so I did this in my demo. So anything that I demoed, I actually added the picture for. You have to go through and you have to find the pictures individually. So as I was loading up demos, I was finding pictures. But I have a hard time finding them by trying to read those tiny little names. I mean, this screen, it's hard to read because the screen is small. I talked about this in my 40XXHNV videos where I didn't know that or think that I was going to need those devices or like them because they were using the same SoC as everything else. Then I go to use them and I'm like, holy crap, I really needed a 4-inch screen. Now, I still don't think I have to have a 4-inch screen. I like gaming on a 3.5-inch screen, but when it comes to words and lettering and stuff, you can't see anything. I mean, here's another example. We could resort this by list mode, and once we do that, can you read those games? You can over here maybe, but if you have the pictures, once you add the picture, that's going to go away. So maybe you don't want the pictures. I don't know. That's the other thing is everywhere you go on this handheld, the same buttons don't do the same things. For instance, like I said, the IO button sometimes will open this IO menu over here, which is great. So this gives you access to the things that are in your drop down usually. So I don't have to try to do the drop down, right? I don't think it makes it any less smudgy because either way I'm touching the screen. But this does give you access to like your brightness meter. This will give you access to your controller settings and things like that. Turn your vibration on and off. And then also you get performance, which is pretty cool. Now you can actually, if you wanted to, under settings, you can set your own fan curves. So we can go handheld settings. Oh, and by the way, there's 2 updates to the system when I got it. So just to give you a heads up, when you get this, you'll probably have updates to do. If we go to personalize it under general, I don't remember how to do it, but there is a way, fan settings. So you can actually change your fan curves if that's something you want to do. You can manually change where your fan curves. I think it's got decent fan curves. Also, I don't think this fan's very loud at all. Let's see if you can hear it. So I'll do it with it off. And I'll move through the fans. So this is low. This is high. This is max. So max really kicks it. Max is fan, but here's hot. It's really not, I mean, I don't even notice it if I'm playing a game. If there's any amount of volume on, I don't notice it on high. Now max sounds like a vacuum cleaner. So there is a big difference there. I've never used on max. Honestly, you probably don't ever have to go over low. Some other things is like if you start to use this bar up here that I accidentally drag around all the time. And now this is supposed to give you your information. I don't know how accurate it is because the FPS barely ever moves. And if you're running an FPS counter in any game with any emulator, even RetroArch, it moves all the time. And this will just say 60 or 30 the whole time. It doesn't fluctuate. Every once in a while it'll if it's really struggling for maybe like more than 3 or 4 seconds, then you'll start to see some dipping on here down to like 57 or something. But it doesn't actually get down to like the 44 or whatever. This is an example I was thinking of earlier, where it was running at 44 for a good, I don't know, 6 seconds, and then this dropped down to 57. It never even got all the way down to what it was. So I don't know how much I trust that. I think IOSpace has a long ways to go. I think this is their 3rd device putting it IOSpace on, if I remember right. And so I can't believe that it's this primitive still. And the fact that you have to individually go find your, I mean, seriously, if I wanted to add, let's see, what was I in before? Oh, Game Boy Advance, so I don't have many in here. So if I want to add this, I got to go to it, open it. I got to go into data management. So I'm looking for 2-in-1 Crash Bandicoot. I have to go in here and type in 2-in-1 Crash Bandicoot. Oh my goodness. Or we'll just type in Crash Bandicoot. Band. And then you've got to go over hit search, and then you have to go through everything here to find Crash Bandicoot, and then you also have to figure out which one is it, so it's not the super pack, I don't think. And you can screw this up, because if you pick the wrong one, then that's just what it's set at, unless you can figure out how to get back in here, which is very difficult after you already set one. So right now I'm only seeing one option, but I'm sure if I put 2 and 1 in there, maybe it'll come up with every 2 in 1 game, which there's hundreds of, but eventually we'll find the Crash Bandicoot one. And then you choose it as an example, and it'll update, and then you're going to see that information right on this screen, and then you go back to the screen, and then it'll have a logo for it. So that's what it takes in order just to get an icon on here. I can't just run Screen Scraper, because that would make way too much sense. I mean, shit, even like Daijishu and ESDE, they all just do it for you. Even, now it doesn't want to go home. Sweet. Okay. Even Beacon attempts it. So Beacon tries to get all of them on there for you. Doesn't always do the best job, but you can go and chase the few that it doesn't get. For the most part, it's going to get them for you. It does take a while with Beacon. It doesn't not necessarily there right away, but they do eventually show up. But now we have the system that is the home app for this handheld, and you literally have to go through all of that just to get anything set up, which is, for $250, I think is a ripoff. But, you know, I've been in this world a long time, and not just this world, but just in the electronics world, and I do know, even when I bought my first really expensive Sony flat screen TV, seems like the more money you spend, the more sacrifices you're gonna make, and the more you have to be willing to make those sacrifices. Things being kind of wonky, because it is a boutique device. They're only gonna sell so many of these, and then Ayaneo is never gonna look back at this. They're gonna move on to something else, and we'll never see one of these come out again. I almost guarantee it, because we're not really seeing them re-release devices, unless they change the operating system, but I don't think they're gonna go from Windows to Linux, you know, with this bad boy. So I don't see that happening, or Android to Linux, I guess, in this case. Odds are pretty good we're never gonna see this again. Now, this is something that is a pet project of the CEO of Ayaneo. Maybe we'll see it again, but it is part of the Remix project. I just think that they release handhelds too much. So from the time that this went up for sale, they've had 3 handhelds up for sale. 2 of them somewhat within this category, and then 1 more high-end Android device. Ayaneo releases handhelds faster than any other company out there. So if you follow Ambernick and you think they release at their 3-week release schedule, you think that that's quick, you're way off. And the other thing that Ayaneo does that drives me nuts is they crowdsource all their handhelds. They have to be making enough profit now not to use Indiegogo. Because with Indiegogo, if they just decide one day to pull the plug, they're not going to make handhelds anymore, shut down shop, they're not going to give you your money back. They're not even required to on Indiegogo. They have enough money, obviously. If they're designing handhelds like this, they have enough money, and they're selling handhelds every week. A new handheld, so I don't understand the Indiegogo thing, and it's difficult. So, like, for instance, you can accidentally tip $40 when you purchase them. It happens, you know, because that's automatic on there. You know, there's too many variables. But the handheld itself is very nice, and I'm not upset for having it. In fact, I rather enjoy the handheld. I just want to make sure that we're setting the correct expectations. As a reviewer, I think we have a responsibility to make sure we're setting the correct expectations. Is this a great handheld for Game Boy Advance and maybe a little bit of some other higher-end systems? Absolutely. Is it super powerful? No. And if anybody that tells you it is lying to you. Look up any of the results of a G99. I don't know why everybody advertises this as some like powerful chipset. $50 more, you can get yourself an Odin 2 Pro. You want a powerful chipset? You know, that'll play anything that's on the market right now. It outplays the emulators that are available. So this is nothing. What you're paying for is the name, and the fact that it's more of an exclusive club to have an Ayaneo device. That's it. You have 8 V10s here, and I guarantee you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference between double the resolution and 4 times the resolution natively. So in that aspect, no. Price for performance, it's an absolute waste of money. But again, for me, chasing that Game Boy Advance dream, I love this thing, man. I really can't put it down. I really like it. And I've been trying every system under the sun, trying to figure out what can and can't play on here. I took a lot out of this video that I had on here originally, and for one, my gameplay section was too long, but it still is. There's some other things going on with manufacturers right now, and I just don't want to step on anybody's toes. So I figured I would just leave some of that stuff out, but you can get a good feel for what it does. And I think I gave a decent enough explanation. And it will play a Sega Saturn, so I know that question comes up a lot. It was not in the list of questions that I had for this, but I did have a list of questions from you, the viewers. So I'm going to try to knock those out real quick. All right, so you're going to see a list of questions just fall onto the screen here real quick, and I'm going to tell you, I'm just going to go through the answers. Fan's very quiet. I never even noticed it kick in until I started playing with the max button, and I just answered that question. How does it smell? It smells like a money pit. That's what it smells like. No video out. I do have an adapter I want to try on here though, because I have one that actually makes the RG505 get video out through USB-C when it doesn't have video out through USB-C, and it is possible to do with an Orange Pi. I don't believe that's what's in this adapter that I have, so I'm going to try this because it's actually coming up in a video for my 505 when I revisit that. So I think I'm going to take a look at that and see if that'll work on here. I just haven't had a chance to do it. I was kind of away from that over the weekend, so I need to try that out. No headphone jack or headphone 3.5 plug, obviously, but they do work through USB-C. I tried some USB-C headphones. It seemed to work. The D-pad, I said earlier, but it's got a shallow pivot. It's kind of soft, but it's got a shallow pivot, but still works good enough for most of what you're going to do. You might see a little difference. You might not hit all your Shoryukens playing fighting games, but you're going to get pretty close to hitting all of them. Face buttons are excellent. Hand cramping is minimal. I kind of jokingly was like, due to battery performance, because you're only going to get a couple hours depending on what you're playing. If you're playing high-end games, you're going to get a few hours. If you're playing lower-end games, you might get 4 hours or whatever out of it. So you're going to get better battery life than the Steam Deck, but it's still not going to be great. The G99 in general doesn't get the greatest battery life with this SoC. Does it get warm? It does a little bit after gameplay, but it's only like right here, and that's because it's venting. So the handle itself doesn't really get warm, even though it's made out of metal. I'm interested to see, because I have some metal handhelds that actually get really cold in the wintertime. I don't know if this will be warm enough to keep it from getting cold, but we're going to find out here in a couple months. You can play Pico 8 on here, but you have to use an application that runs Pico 8, which I can't remember the name of it right now. I'll put it up on the screen. It's not the greatest application in the world. P8 Go. You can't load your own Pico 8 files or put your login information on there, though, so I'm not sure what they're doing there. I feel like it's just streaming a bunch of games because you can just swipe through them and then add some to your library that you want to play, but it really just sits in the app, so I'm not exactly sure how that app works yet. The screen's very saturated and bright. I know I had some questions about that. It seems to be picky about voltage when charging. I can't charge this with my dock, but I can charge it with pretty much all the rest of the chargers I have. So for some reason, my Odin's charge on it, my Absolute charges on it, everything I have will charge with that Odin dock, but for some reason this will not. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Also, the cable they gave you for this is kind of lame. It's not even braided or branded. You know, you think you spend this much money, you get a branded cable, but no. They just picked one up over at the $1.25 store. That's really just being nitpicky, by the way. Ayaneo Home gives you access to performance changes, which we talked about already. Joysticks have a very loose tension to them. Can't remember if they do it in pounds or grams of force, but I'm going to try to give you my best FPS. 120 is about where I like to play an FPS game. I'd say these are about 80 as far as how loose they are. So I don't remember if the force is by grams or by pounds or how that works. Not by pounds probably, but maybe pounds per square inch maybe. But they're about an 80 versus like the 120 I would usually play with on an FPS. They're still Hall Effect. Either way, they would have been Hall Effect, but that just happens to be what it is. Yes, it's capable of playing Sega Saturn. I played about 5 different Sega Saturn games on here. They all worked out just fine. Are the shoulder and trigger buttons difficult to use? Yes. You do get kind of used to it, but a lot of the racing games I tried on here, you use these buttons, and they're, especially if you have to use the R2 and L2 for like brake and gas, it's not that much fun. It's a lot of moving around. Everything plays really well if it's like this. So you know, your R1, L1 are fine. Your other buttons are fine. Once you have to start getting into some of these inner ones, and then you're trying to race or something, it's really hard to use these joysticks when your fingers are all cramped up here. The last one's battery life again. It's about 4 hours on lower end systems. It's 1.5 to 2 hours on higher end systems and Android apps for some reason. I don't know why. This is the first handheld I've ever reviewed where Android apps seem to take up more battery than the emulation apps, but they do, and I don't know if that's just their higher resolution or what, but I played a lot of Horizon Chase on Android on here, just trying to test everything out. Yeah, it is what it is. But I think that's where I'm going to leave this video here today, just as a first impressions video. I will do some more playing with it. My opinion's already beginning to change about it a little bit. My end game is kind of the same, but I know everybody's going to ask, should I buy this device? And that is totally in the eye of the beholder. If you can see the value in buying one of these at $250 as the price is about to go up to $250, by all means. I think, you know, it's a great handheld, very performative, relatively comfortable, very good quality. It is a boutique device. So this is the fancy one, if you want to get one fancy one. I'm actually afraid to leave the house with it. If in your eyes, it would be a better value to get, I don't know, 8 V10s and pass them out to your friends and play net play games together, that's usually where I'm at. So I understand if that's you. Totally get it, because that's usually me. Then I would say no. I would say get 8 V10s, and you're still going to get awesome Game Boy Advance play, and it's going to look relatively the same, and you get to play with all your friends. So I see that as being an advantage. Even if you don't have 8 friends, I'm sure you can find a stranger to give one to. So that's my 2 cents on it. Value is whatever you perceive it to be. To me, it's worth it. To you, maybe not. Let me know the answers to a couple of questions here. Do you like when I go through your user questions like I did on this one? Because this is the first time I've tried this. Figured I'd just run through a few questions from you guys and kind of make it more interactive. If you guys like it, I'll keep doing it. If not, we'll skip it. And I don't know if I'll do it in every video, but ones like this where there's going to be a lot of questions, I have no problem doing that if that's something you guys are interested in. Also, do you think that a G99 is performative? No, what do you think? Do you think it's worth the money? Let me know down on my thingamabob. But that's all I got for today. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, share this video with your friends, because sharing helps grow the channel. And yeah, there's a couple videos up here on the screen that you could watch that YouTube says you're going to like. I happen to agree with YouTube, so I don't know what the videos are because they're random, but I would say watch one of those and help that algorithm. Also, there's another subscribe button right there just floating around on the screen. So now you got 2 of them right there in front of you. So another opportunity to subscribe. Just saying. Just saying. But that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.